The Secret of Charlotte Bronte by Frederica Richardson MacDonald. Part 1, Chapter 4. The Confessions at Saint Gudule. We are now in a position to realize the emotions and experiences that lasted up to the eve of Charlotte's return to England. But there are two events that vary the incessant conflict with Madame Hager, and that help to form the basis of real experiences expressed in the portraits that are not historical pictures of Zoraide Reuter and of Madame Beck. These two events also reappear as scenes in Villette that did not take place in the way the authoress relates them, but that put us in possession of the parallel facts in Charlotte's true career, where she felt the very same emotions she describes in the novel. The first event gives us the original history of what in Villette reappears in the imaginary account of Lucy Snow's confession, and serves there to introduce us to the Jesuit who is half a spy and half a saint, Père Silas. In Charlotte's life, the event, as it is related by her in a letter to Emily, took place during that long and solitary vacation in the empty pensionnat, where, from August to October 1843, Charlotte was left to face the position now made for her by Madame Hager's discovery of the secret that, possessed by her enemy, could not remain hidden from Charlotte herself. Charlotte's letter to Emily begins by describing the desolation of this large house, with its deserted classrooms and silent garden and gallery, and for her solitary companion, only the repulsive-minded and malicious Mademoiselle Blanche, whom she has described in an earlier letter as a spy of Madame Hager's. "I should inevitably," she writes, "fall into the gulf of low spirits if I stayed always by myself. Yesterday I went on a pilgrimage to the cemetery, and far beyond it, onto a hill where there was nothing but fields as far as the horizon. When I came back it was evening, but I had such a repugnance to return to the house which contained nothing that I cared for, that I kept treading the narrow streets in the neighborhood of the Rue d'Isabelle and avoiding it. I found myself opposite to Saint Gudule, and the bell, whose voice you know, began to toll for evening salut. I went in quite alone, which procedure you will say is not much like me. Wandered about the aisles, where a few old women were saying their prayers, till vespers. I stayed till they were over. Still I could not leave the church, nor force myself to go home, to school I mean. An odd whim came into my head. In a solitary part of the cathedral, 6 or 7 people still remained, kneeling by the confessionals. In 2 confessionals I saw a priest. I felt as if I did not care what I did, provided it was not absolutely wrong, and that it served to vary my life and yield a moment's interest. I took a fancy to change myself into a Catholic and go and make a real confession to see what it was like. Knowing me as you do, you will think this odd, but when people are by themselves, they have singular fancies. A penitent was occupied in confessing. They do not go into the sort of pew or cloister the priest occupies, but kneel down on the steps and confess through a grating. Both the confessor and the penitent whisper very low. You can hardly hear their voices. After I had watched 2 or 3 penitents go and return, I approached at last, and knelt down in a niche which was just vacated. I had to kneel there 10 minutes waiting, for on the other side was another penitent, invisible to me. At last that one went away, and a little wooden door inside the grating opened, and I saw the priest leaning his ear toward me. I was obliged to begin, and yet I did not know a word of the formula with which they always commenced their confessions. I began by saying I was a foreigner and had been brought up as a Protestant. The priest asked if I was a Protestant then. I somehow could not tell a lie and said yes. He replied that in that case I could not jouir du bonheur de la confesse. But I was determined to confess. And at last he said he would allow me, because it might be the first step towards returning towards the true church. I actually did confess, a real confession. When I had done, he told me his address and said that every morning I was to go to the Rue du Parc to his house, and he would reason with me and try to convince me of the error and enormity of being a Protestant. I promised faithfully. Of course, however, the adventure stops here, and I hope I shall never see the priest again. I think you had better not tell Papa this. He will not understand that it was only a freak, and will perhaps think I am going to turn Catholic. Only a freak? An odd whim? Even without the knowledge of the special facts we now possess, could any serious student of Charlotte Bronte believe it? Given what we know of her seriousness, of her religious temper, that cannot take spiritual things lightly, of her rational Protestant piety, of her antipathy to Catholic formulas, given all this as characteristic of her aspirations and as characteristics of her personality, shyness, and reserve carried almost to morbidness, can anyone believe that mere ennui, a craving for variety, excitement, flung this normally shamefaced, timid English woman down on her knees on the stone steps of the Saint Gudule confessional, inspired her with the determination needed to withstand the priest's objections to allow her, as a Protestant, the joie du bonheur de la confesse, compelled her to insist upon her claim, by virtue of her dire need of this happiness, or at any rate of this relief, of unburthening her soul by a real confessional. A real confession of what? What crime has this poor innocent Charlotte on her conscience that stands in such need of confession? No crime, we may be sure. Only the weight, the misery of this tragic secret, too intimate, too sacred to be confided even to those nearest to her, even to Emily. But now that her enemy holds it, too grievous a secret to remain unshared with someone who is not an enemy, nor yet a friend. A stranger who will not blush nor tremble for her, will not see her whilst she whispers through the grating, whom she will not see or meet again. Someone who by profession is God's delegate of mercy to deliver the unwilling offender who repents him of his secret sins. Someone who is pledged, when he has given pardon and consolation, never to betray what he has heard, to forget it even. Someone who, experienced in offering counsel and consolation, may, who can say, offer some comfort or advice, assisting her to extricate herself from the snare into which she has fallen and to recover safely. Does one not know what the confession whispered through the grating really was? Or can one doubt what the priest's advice was? Was it not necessarily the same advice so urgently forced upon her by Madame Heger? She must escape from the peril of temptation. She must not show this tragic passion any mercy. She must break the spell. She must go back to England. She felt she could not do this thing of herself without God's special grace preventing her. Therefore she must diligently seek to obtain this grace by the aid of the Holy Catholic Church, and she must call in the Rue du Parc next morning. In so far as the last recommendation went, we know Charlotte did not follow it. The adventure, as she says herself, stopped there. Nor is there anything in her own story to indicate the existence of any real Jesuit taking the place of the mischief-making saint, Père Silas, familiar to readers of Villette. The priest of Saint Gudule comes to us as a more impressive personage just because Charlotte never met him again. But his advice remained vividly present to her recollection, we may feel sure. On the 23rd October, about a month after this event, she writes once more to Ellen Nussey. It is a curious position to be so utterly solitary in the midst of numbers. One day lately I felt as if I could bear it no longer, and I went to Madame Heger and gave her notice. If it had depended upon her, I should certainly have soon been at liberty. But Monsieur Heger, having heard of what was in agitation, sent for me the day after and pronounced with vehemence his decision that I could not leave. I could not at that time have persevered in my intentions without exciting him to anger, and promised to stay a little while longer. And so what had to be done in the end was postponed, and the old hidden enmity between Charlotte and Madame Heger went on for another